Hi everyone, good to see you guys, and I should say maybe Happy New Year, because I think that the last time we saw each other, in fact the last time we saw each other was not a video I had recorded on New Year's Day, even though it came out on New Year's Day, and I forgot to include the wishes, so here are my wishes to you. Now today in this video we're going to be diving deep once again. Particularly, we're going to be discussing the concept of individuation for the NI dominant, and it is very likely that we'll focus on the INFJ personality. But I think that this conversation will be relevant to all NI dominants, including INTJs. Now, before I move on to my topic, keep in mind that my book on the INFJ, Ecstatic Soul, is still available. All the links below, less than $10, and my novel, The Infinite Castle. An exploration, it's a book in its own right, book of fiction, but also you could see it as an exploration of the INFJ personality in fictional form, less than $10 as well, all links below. So, individuation for the INFJ, or more broadly speaking, individuation for the NI dominant. What does this mean, and why is this topic interesting? I should say in the first place that I'm currently, I started a very, very daunting journey recently. And how could I describe this journey? Well, I got hold of the collected works of a certain Carl Gustav Jung, who, is in many ways the founding father of the whole concept of, or theory of personality that is dominant today, crystallized in so many models, the most prominent of which is MBTI. Now, the collected works are altogether, and including a lot of bibliography and footnotes and everything, so that's probably a good few thousand pages to subtract from the text. It's about 14,000 pages. So it's going to take me a while to get through, but it's giving me so many new ideas and insights to discuss with you. But as a result, I should say that the content of my videos is probably going to be very influenced by depth psychology, which also means that it's going to be somewhat, it's going to be going deep. So hopefully you guys will be on board with this. Now, without further ado, it's undeniable that in Jungian analytical psychology, the concept of individuation plays a major part. And since MBTI is so much derived from Jung's work on psychological types, it's also undeniable that the concept of individuation spills over into MBTI. But it's not a concept that we come across that often, is it? I think that what we come across more often is a slightly diluted version of it, or a slightly diluted term, which we might call self-actualization or self-realization. This is ideally what we are doing when we are exploring our type. INFJ, INFP, INTP, ISTP, ISFJ, whatever it might be. We're not merely, ideally, again, looking for ways of patting each other on the back and saying, oh, we're so unique, we're this or that. But we are also looking for ways to not so much improve ourselves, because I think the concept of improvement is a slightly slippery one, but of realizing ourselves fully, of becoming who we are, in Nietzsche's famous phrase. Self-actualization is probably a term that we're all familiar with. And in MBTI, it's not always quite clear how this self-actualization is to be achieved or pursued once we have all the clues as to what our personality is. So, for example, there's a lot of people on this channel that are INFJ. You're watching this channel, you already know that you're INFJ, you're still watching this channel. So why are you still watching this channel, apart from the fact that it makes me very delighted? Well, part of the reason why you're watching this channel is because I suspect you're looking for more knowledge and edification, so far as I can provide this, on the INFJ personality and other personality types. but also because you're engaged in the process of self-actualization through exploration, among other things of your type, and you consider that this channel, my channel, is contributing to it. Perhaps because also Jungian existentialism, as encapsulated in this book, is providing a clue to the INFJ consciousness, or attempting to provide that, and that contributes further to the process of self-actualization. But in Jung, what's interesting is that the concept of individuation is central. It's notoriously slippery, as a lot of Jungian concepts are. You know, it's when you always try to pin down once and for all what is individuation, what is an archetype, what is the collective unconscious, what is the anima, what is the persona, what is the shadow. Jung is always going to be expansive rather than reductive. You know, he's, instead of telling you it's reduced down to this, that, and that other property, he'll tell you, well, it's evoked in alchemy, it's evoked in myth, it's evoked in this and that. It's you see an instance of this in mystics' experiences, or in the experiences of mental illness, or split personality, so on and so forth. So individuation is not an easy concept to discuss, insofar as we're trying to really reduce it to what Jung meant by it. But nevertheless, we can consider it for our own purposes as more or less synonymous with self-actualization. And when it comes to MBTI, I think that what's true, I really believe is true, is that we're trying to integrate as much as possible of our unconscious repressed personalities into consciousness, in an organic fashion, and without doing violence to ourselves. As you know, like when an INFJ is in the grip, so for example, when an INFJ is in the grip of SE, as it usually we're in the grip of our inferior functions, an INFJ may display superficial SE traits, but they are traits that will be very, very obviously unintegrated traits when SE is very unconscious in the INFJ consciousness, in the INFJ psyche, I mean. So the manifestations will be infantile and archaic, and often the signs of unintegration will be manifested in risk-taking, in indulging in food, or indulging in other things. This is something that a lot of INFJs, INTJs share about personal experiences in periods of great stress. And so you could see the manifestation of the unintegrated SE sort of coming to the threshold of consciousness in the case of the grip. If with the process of individuation, we're ideally looking at a progressive integration of these parts of our unconscious that are, like I said, they're either repressed, or they're not particularly repressed, they just happen to be unconscious, but unconscious enough that they end up having an influence on our personality. And so for Jung, this represents obstacles to the full realization of ourself. If you're familiar with his terminology, our ego is basically what we think our self is in pure consciousness, whereas the self is the holistic integration of the ego and the unconscious parts of the psyche. And once we are in touch, once we have integrated both sides, we can reach a state of psychic wholeness, which, you know, we might find correlates of this or illustrations of this in the life of certain mystics, in the life of the Buddha, in the life of others who have been able to reach this state of the holistic achievement is usually assumed to lead to a state of spiritual peace and contentment. In a certain sense, you get the impression that this person cannot be disturbed, this person cannot really be harrowed by anything that happens externally, because they have managed to integrate the both sides of their psyches. At least this is the Jungian view. And this is going to be a goal for INFJs who are willing to not simply stop at the descriptions that they find online, but who are engaged in the process of individuation as well. So individuation tends to allow us to channel psychic energy very consistently and without too many hurdles. You know, again, we think of chakra flowing very fluidly, flowing without obstruction throughout our body. There are strong parallels here to emphasize as well. But there's a risk. There's a very real risk for NI dominance in this particular instance. It's a risk that is going to be present for every type. The NI dominance is an interesting position though, because on one level, the nature of NI is to have a particularly strong acuity of perception of inner contents, including archetypes and what is going on in the unconscious, in the unconscious, both personal and collective. So for Jung, the very fact of being an NI dominant puts you in a preferred position to be able to access the contents of the unconscious because you can perceive them better. And it's no surprise perhaps that Jung himself, who wrote about the unconscious and made it accessible to us as far as he could and with such clarity, at least insofar as could be achieved, given that we're talking about the unconscious, it was an NI dominant himself. So the NI dominant is in this position where we are supposed to be acutely in touch with the contents of the unconscious. The risk is, and I think, you know, this really transpires in the works of Jung, the risk is that we end up confusing. We become aware of our peculiar perceptiveness of unconscious processes, but instead of becoming engaged in the process of seeking to integrate them over time, including the shadow, including what you don't like about yourself, including what you reject, including the more inferior functions such as the SE, including, basically it's a whole life journey, because we're not going to be able to integrate things smoothly from the start. It's going to be a lifelong journey, and because it's going to involve failure and patience and trials and tribulations, it's going to be a humbling experience. So it's going to be an experience where there's going to be suffering, and where we might have to divest ourselves in all the ways in which we think that we're special. And that is where the risk lies, because there is a very strong difference between what is really going on in our psyche and what our ego is telling us is going on, because the ego is influenced by belief fixations, and the ego has a lot of fixations on what it wants to be. The ego is always seeking to give itself an image of being in control and of standing out and of being special in some way or other. Even if this special quality is achieved through altruism, that doesn't matter. It's still the ego seeking to reassure itself about its fixations. And for Jung, it's very clear that if you want to be individuated in the proper sense, become in touch with yourself in the proper sense, you have to go beyond those fixations. And what that means is to never, or to always be aware that when you're engaged in the process of self-actualization, there will be a temptation on the part of your persona, because the persona is a phenomenon that exists and is essentially the image that the ego is maintaining in relation to the public world. So the persona is going to want to portray itself as someone who is self-actualized, because it has maybe predispositions to that effect through being an dominant, or other, qualities as being someone who's deep and thoughtful and maybe not very social and who spends a lot of time thinking. Always be aware of the fact that when you're having those thoughts, they might not be the thoughts of your psychic wholeness being progressively achieved. They might actually be thoughts of your persona, a very superficial conscious process that is very much at the level of consciousness, not reaching into the unconscious, but maybe the persona is telling you, yes, I'm actually doing all of these things. So how to separate, how to tell apart the sayings of the persona from the sayings of the whole psyche, integrating the conscious and the unconscious. Well, that is indeed a topic for another video, isn't it? Because we've already been talking for 15 minutes. But one way of looking at it, I think, one way of telling them apart has to have something to do with the fact that the sayings of the persona are going to be much more oriented to ego gratification, whereas the sayings of the whole psyche are going to be humble. They're going to be humbled because they're going to be humbled by their honest facing and confrontation with the contents of the unconscious, which are the unwanted contents in many respects. And when you confront unwanted contents, you have no room to be gratified in your ego. So always keep in mind, there's always going to be a big challenge in figuring out in whether along our path to individuation, when we think we're making progress, are we really making progress? Or is our persona convincing ourselves of it? And if we fall prey to those sweet words and songs of the persona, are we not risking regressing instead of progressing? But I leave that to your thought and thinking for the rest of the Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. That's if I decide to publish on Sunday. I might publish on Saturday, but we'll see. Don't forget my books and about my Patreon page, where you can become a young and existentialist for €3 a month and have priority in suggesting video content to me. See you soon, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.